Here, in the German city of Rostock in the 15th century, power was seized by a man who has been largely forgotten in our days, but whose history is extremely interesting: Hans Runge. If you want to, you can see in him the early form of a social revolutionary. Rather, I think he was a cult leader, even if he didn't use religion to justify his actions. This video is based exclusively on my own research. It can be read in German in a similar version as part of my doctoral thesis from 6 years ago. In the course of his life, Hans Runge worked as a stonemason, cook and paver. He made his first public appearance on January 12, 1486. The Dukes of Mecklenburg, the territory heir too for some reason, wrote to the city council that the council should order the craftsman to return the possessions he had bought from the wife of a ducal servant without his knowledge. Moreover, the lords did not forget to mention that Runge had acted against the verdict of the Council of Rostock by doing so. Therefore, the craftsman should also pay damages. It is no longer possible to reconstruct whether this happened. In any case, two other points are much more important. First, Runge apparently did not care about the verdict of the Rostock Council, if there had been one, as well as a possible fight with the dukes. Respect or even fear of lordly authorities was alien to him. Later on, the dukes should be hardly able to escape with their lives when they visited Rostock. They had to flee in secret at night after they were beaten up. Second, Runge was evidently reasonably wealthy, as he was able to acquire possessions of such an extent or nature that it was worth the trouble for the ducal servant to involve the lords. In fact, even the enemy chronicles never report that Runge enriched himself, despite his, let's say, rather eventful career. He had made good money through his work. After the letter from the dukes, Runge disappears into the darkness of history for a year. It was only after riots in January 1487 that he reappeared. He is said to have come before the city council and demanded that no one should be prosecuted because of what had happened. Apparently he prevailed with this demand and more. The mayors, Berthold Kerkhoff and Arndt Hasselbecke, fled the city on March 28, 1487. This suggests that the insurgents had de facto control of the city at the time and were not brought to justice. The Lübeck syndic Albert Kranz, a contemporary, fittingly describes that 3 new mayors had been appointed in place of the evasive city leaders. From then on, Runge had found his role. He staged himself as a kind of tribune of the people and tried to achieve a permanent state of emergency. His charisma was the primary form of his legitimation of power, but not the only one. He thus ruled with the support of the mass of the people who seemed to have followed him willingly. In case of doubt, threats and intimidation were the means by which he sought to achieve his goals. Initially, he was assisted by a man named Dietrich Boldewan. In February 1489, the two jointly decided to overthrow the council and set up a new one. Runge had the council imprisoned in the town hall and bound the community to his person by means of an oath on the market square. After being intimidated by harsh threats, the Rostock regiment handed over seals, privileges, and the city's books to Runge. Members of the council who did not like the leader of the insurrection were repeatedly forced to resign. Death threats against themselves as well as against their families and harsh insults painted at their front doors were part of the everyday life of council members from then on until they resigned. Physical altercations were also not ruled out. As Kranz reports, they always had to confirm in writing that their resignation had been lawful. Runge repeatedly demanded appropriate documents to legitimize his actions. For example, he had it confirmed by a notary that the city's community had not been privy to the council's plan for a feud that had recently escalated. Through this document, he considered the members of the council at that time to be convicted of treason. Most of the resigned councillors fled to Lübeck, the head of the Hanseatic League, and demanded that the Hanseatic cities should act accordingly to the rules of the Hanseatic League. In fact, Lübeck finally delivered the right statutes to Rostock. This document was a decision by the Hanseatic cities to intervene militarily, if necessary, in order to bring back to power a council that had been forcibly deposed. This option was never used. Runge was therefore not impressed by this and instead confiscated the estates of the exiles in the city in March 1490. The wives of the refugees were given a period of 14 days to leave Rostock. In the meantime, Boldewan had risen to the position of mayor. Runge believed that he was a faithful ally at the head of the council. However, his former companion became estranged from him in the course of 1490. In the city, Runge was successful with his strategy of staging a popular rally whenever decisions were to be made that did not suit him. However, Rostock was economically isolated by sanctions imposed by the Hanseatic cities. Apparently, the people of Rostock began to fear this more and more. Boldewan presided a city delegation that led successful settlement negotiations. The corresponding contract was concluded on December 17, 1490. The compromise stipulated that the old and new councils would rule Rostock together. With this offer of integration, the Hanseatic cities and the exiles successfully tried to split the insurrectionary movement into a council party led by Boldewan and a people's party led by Runge. Runge was not prepared to accept reconciliation and resorted to his preferred tool, to create a state of emergency through a crisis. He took advantage of a minor external confrontation to arrest 30 fishermen and a few other people in Wustrow, some of his Kinderin, and led them to Rostock. Kinderin is the medieval German word for children, however in this case it describes loyal followers. Runge regarded the fishermen as his own and let them go after their identities had been confirmed. The other men were also released but had to agree to return to prison if Runge requested so. Runge felt strong enough to take the next step. On March 12, 1491, he appeared before the city council with his followers and demanded that the settlement treaty with the exiles be revoked. Boldewan refused. This would go against the honor of the council and also that one of Runge, the mayor explained. After all, the community and thus Runge had given a power of attorney to negotiate. Runge vehemently disagreed, saying that he had merely given a power of attorney to listen to suggestions. When one of the councillors tried to cut off the insurgency leader, there happened apparently an action that had already been touched upon, which shows how fanatical the movement was. Runge's supporters attacked the man and mistreated him so badly that he barely survived. This time, however, the council did not budge. Runge and a few other men therefore prepared a new attack. On April 6, 1491, he was to occupy one of the city gates while his allies would strike elsewhere. But the council had been warned and had prepared accordingly. Runge was able to temporarily control the stone gate, but nothing else happened. At first, the council did not intervene further. It took a few days for Runge and other leaders of the movement to be summoned. Apparently, the council was searching for a balance of power, but that wasn't the case in reality. Runge followed the subpoena full of self-confidence, convinced that he would be able to complete the questioning quickly. But now it became clear why the council had presumably allowed Runge to occupy the stone gate, but otherwise did not tolerate any riots in the city. The whole process seems like a trap. The council asked Runge if he indeed actually had occupied the stone gate, while this was only temporarily, but did he do it? Runge admitted this. Now there was no legal document protecting him. He and the master Bernd, who had replaced Boldewan as Runge's second in command, were executed on the same day. His decapitated body was thrown in front of his house at 4 o'clock in the morning, where it was found by his wife who had him buried. Without Runge, the movement immediately collapsed. Runge clearly had too much confidence in his position, in himself, and in his followers, which is why I see him as a cult leader. The leader of the insurrection, who apparently had no particular interest in day-to-day politics, could not believe that anything would happen to him. He thought he was untouchable, that his followers in the council had become so estranged from him that they would rather rule with the old regiment than continue to follow his orders seems to have exceeded his imagination. The fact that he could not compete with the Hanseatic League, the dukes, and the urban upper class at the same time also remained hidden from him. In the Middle Ages, violence and charisma were suitable tools for coming to power and stabilizing one's own situation in the short term. They were unsuitable for maintaining power in the long term.